Welcome to my ranking of films which came out in the year 1988, or at least the ones that I've seen. And I can now reveal I have seen 20 films from this particular year, a nice round number. But before we get into it, just a quick reminder that the top film today will be going through to the grand final of 100 films, where I will be declaring once and for all what the greatest film of all time is. And the film which comes second today may also be joining it, numbers permitting. But for now, let's get into it and find out what is my 20th and therefore least favourite film, which came out in 1988. As far as I'm concerned, Roger Rabbit can go to prison whether he's guilty or not. This film never appealed to me when it came out. The only reason I ended up seeing it at all was because I put it on for my kids one day. It just happened to be on TV, so I got the chance to watch it, and it just didn't work at all for me. This idea of having live action and animation on screen at the same time, it's just really messy. It does not appeal to my eye. The only time I've ever enjoyed live action and animation being the same movie was Kill Bill, but that's not exactly the same thing, is it? So this film is not for me. I think Bob Hoskins has done way better films than this. As far as I'm concerned, it was a failed experiment. Lazy sequel alert, lazy sequel alert. I saw both Short Circuit films when I was growing up. Possibly I saw the second one more than the first, but there's just no value to there being a second one of these. Not unless you really, really like the Johnny Five character. For years, all I could remember about this film was the fact that the two main characters go on a date at some point, and the guy gets the woman's eye colour wrong when he tries to give her a compliment. I mean, that's not ideal if that's your one memory from the movie. I did catch half an hour of it a couple of years ago. I think I was randomly searching for more films for my kids to watch, and yeah, we watched half an hour of Short Circuit 2, so I can now remember more of it, but certainly these films belong in a museum. They are of a bygone age. So this is basically the same situation as Short Circuit 2. You had this original movie which came out called Cocoon, and then a copycat sequel which doesn't really do anything new. Having said that, I might still prefer the second of these just because it's got a vibrant performance from Courtney Cox, and there's some stuff to do with a marine biology centre, I think, which is quite engaging, but I don't think it's done the legacy of these films any good. That the fact that there are two of them, it just kind of stops me anyway from going back and watching one, because I'm sort of afraid that if I watch one, I might then put the second one on, and before you know it, I've spent 4 hours of my week watching Cocoon, which I don't really want to do. So if I'm going to be nice, I will at least say that Cocoon is a nice movie memory from my past, but I just don't really want to watch them again. They belong in a museum with Short Circuit 2. This was a fairly recent watch for me. I only watched it a couple of weeks ago. It's sort of a cross between Lamberto Bava's Demons and The Evil Dead, but it certainly doesn't touch any of the highs from those particular films. The story's not bad. So there's a group of teenagers who decide to have an illegal Halloween party in some kind of mortuary, but they start to then turn into demons throughout the night. But in all honesty, the film feels very uninspired throughout. It possibly lacked a bit of necessary budget as well. I never felt like my brain got out of second gear during this film. My pulse never got up particularly high, and I'm certainly in no rush to go out and find Night of the Demons 2. I'm a huge Friday the 13th fan, but this has never been one of my favourites. It's right down there in the bottom tier of Friday films for me, alongside Freddy vs. Jason and the 2009 remake. Any of those three films could end up bottom of my list on any given day of the week, depending on how I feel. I think Part 7 is the point of the Friday series where they reached a creative nadir. All the characters and situations in this film feel very flat. I don't think putting a girl into the mix who can move stuff with her finger is going to solve your problems particularly. If anything, it would just make them worse. But do bear in mind that there are a lot of fans of this series out there who like this film. You know, whenever I watch somebody's Friday the 13th rankings on YouTube, I usually go into such a video expecting to see part 7 between 6th and 9th, whereas I will always have it down 10th, 11th, 12th, somewhere down there. But yeah, it was never likely to do well in this ranking today. Now, let me just clarify, Child's Play 1 is a much better film than Friday 7, but I just don't think I'm a natural Chucky man. I mean, I reviewed all the Child's Play films late last year. I did enjoy going through them. I think I was quite generous with my scores on the whole. But I've had almost a year now to reflect on that experience, and I've never had any desires to watch the films again. I don't think I'll be putting them on again anytime soon. So, through the passing of time since last year, I've come to realise that I'm not really destined to become a Chucky devotee, and maybe that's fine. I mean, I do consider myself a massive horror fan in general, but maybe it's just not realistic that anybody can be a fan of all the big horror franchises. This first film wasn't actually one of my favourites out of the whole lot of them. I definitely prefer 2 and 3, and I may have even thought that Curse and Cult were better than the original. That's probably a blasphemous statement as far as the more die-hard Child's Play fans are concerned. I will give the original film a lot of credit for its originality and for being the first one, but it did have quite a dated look to it from what I can remember. It's only 15th today, but don't get me wrong, I have a lot of respect for Child's Play 1 and what it did for horror. This is one which younger people watching this video might not have heard of. It's set in a future where an alien species has come to Earth and actually integrated itself into human society. So what we've got here is a kind of buddy cop film where one of the human cops, played by James Caan, gets a new partner who is an alien cop, but he's a little bit racist towards them. So throughout the movie, they have to sort of start to learn to trust each other. It's a story which tailgates a little bit off the success of Lethal Weapon from the previous year. I guess these days it might look a little bit TV movie-ish, but the best thing I can say about this film is that when I rented it in the 90s, I watched it twice in the space of 3 days. That's what you would do back then. If you really liked a film and it was on a rental, you would quickly watch it a second time before you had to take it back, and Alien Nation passed that test. From the great James Caan to the great Gene Hackman, this is another one which is probably quite forgotten these days, I think. It's about a middle-aged colonel who crash lands somewhere in Vietnam. I think I could be wrong about the location and the war, but he has to basically walk about 100 miles through dense forest and inherent danger to get to some kind of pickup point to then be rescued. I don't remember it being particularly action-packed. I think there's a lot of Gene Hackman just walking around with this big long stick that's holding him up. My dad really liked this film. He had it on VHS. I watched it a couple of times. I don't really see myself going back to it unless I was doing some kind of Gene Hackman ranking video. You know what? That's not actually the world's worst idea. I'm going to write this down. This is good shit. Big is a film about a 12-year-old boy who wishes himself into being an adult and his wish comes true. But no sooner has he started to enjoy the perks of his independence, he realizes that actually it's not all it's cracked up to be, and he's not at all ready for the woman who throws herself at him halfway through the film. So by the end, he has gone back to being a kid and everything is as it was before. I don't think this film is set at Christmas, but I kind of think that it should have been. I think it could have been one of the really great Christmassy films from the 80s, and a lot of the focus of the story is about toys, so I think it would have fitted a Christmas theme. We watched this in my house about 3 or 4 times growing up. It was something of a family favourite. I remember my mum saying that Tom Hanks, even though he was the star in this film, he probably wouldn't go on to have a great career because, in her opinion, he was just a little bit childlike and his face wasn't quite movie starish enough. What a terrible prediction that turned out to be. I was always jealous of Tom Hanks's bedroom in this film, the one that he gets in the big apartment, and it's just full of like toys and pinball machines and stuff and basketballs. I really wanted that bedroom. I think they could remake this film, but maybe do it with video games instead of toys. I don't know. This is my favourite of the Crocodile Dundee films, even though I've still not actually seen the third one. I could easily accept an argument that the first one should be considered to be the best because it's an original story, it's got something to say, whereas the second film is just taking those same characters and putting them into a situation where they've got to survive some criminals for a couple of hours. But I still prefer the second one. I am more of an action guy than a comedy drama guy. And I like the fact that the use of the locations has been reversed this time around so that we go to Australia second. I do prefer the Outback as a film location to New York. So for me personally, it's better that we have Australia to look forward to in the second half. Although I do think it's a little bit lame that they can't have Crocodile Dundee kill anybody. They have to sort of get his wife to do it for him at the end. I was so buzzing though when I came out of the cinema having watched this. I think I was only about 7 or 8 at the time. I think my brother would have been about 4. I'm amazed looking back that he actually sat still for this all the way through. But for the rest of that day, I was thinking about nothing else but what a possible Crocodile Dundee 3 could look like. Unfortunately, they took so long to make it that by the time it did come out, I had long moved on. I had no interest in seeing it. Such is the danger of taking too long to make a film sequel. I'm allowing this one to sneak into the top 10 purely on instinct, really, because I haven't seen it in the longest time. I only really remember the little girl and the fact that mirrors are the focus point in the third one. But like I said in another video, I really need to go back and revisit the Poltergeist franchise. The first one is obviously a classic. This third one did really creep me out when I was younger. I do remember that. And the second one would be like a whole new movie for me because I've not seen it. Well, it actually would be a whole new movie for me. And I guess I would be prepared to give the remake one watch, although I've heard that it's absolutely terrible. This is the 5th and final Dirty Harry film. I think Clint Eastwood was about 60 when he did this one, so just about believable that he could still be a cop on the beat at this point. There's lots to enjoy about the Deadpool. Liam Neeson's in it. It must have been one of his earlier roles. He plays a horror director, and that aspect of the story is a lot of fun. Jim Carrey's in it. I'm guessing this would have been one of his earliest ever films. He's only in one scene, and I'm not a big Jim Carrey fan at all, but his little bit in this is absolutely hilarious. There's also this incredible action sequence with a remote control car, which is also a bomb, which absolutely uses the hills and contours of San Francisco to great effect. And the finale, although low-key, is extremely satisfying. So this is absolutely not some late-in-the-day cash grab. It is a more than worthy addition to the Dirty Harry franchise, and in my opinion, a fitting send-off for the character. This is a fantastic sequel to the first Critters film. I think most people would probably say that it's either Critters 1 or 2 in terms of the best in the franchise. The first film possibly has the best overall story. It feels like the best complete film, if you like, whereas the second one is more a case of a big long string of really satisfying moments, such as the Easter Bunny guy goes through the window and the big giant rolling Critters ball that turns that guy into a skeleton in about 3 seconds flat. So I think Critters 2 is possibly the most fun of all the Critters movies, although my heart still pulls me towards that original film when it comes to thinking about what my favourite one is. Although I would certainly be fascinated to do a Critters ranking at some point, particularly as I've never even gotten around to watching the final 2 that came out, Critters 4 and Critters Attacks. I've only seen 3 of the 5, so it's definitely something for the future on this channel, I think. I was 7 when Rambo 3 came out, and I've got a story to tell about this one actually, because when I was in primary school, my path that I had to take to get to school took me past a bus stop, and there always used to be film posters on this bus stop of whatever was showing at the cinema usually, and they had a Rambo 3 poster on there for a while, and every time I walked past this bus stop on the way to school, I just used to look at this poster and drool. I mean, I'd seen the first two Rambo films at this point because my mum rented them out and let me watch them, but it wasn't in her power to let me watch Rambo 3 because I never would have got into the cinema at 7 when this was an 18 certificate. So yeah, I was just teased by this poster every day for about a month as I went to school. You know that scene in Santa Claus the movie where the kid, the homeless kid, drools on the window of McDonald's? He's like, it's a bit of an embarrassing scene to watch these days, to be honest. But that was me every day passing this bus stop. I would look up at this poster and go, and it would be another 10 years before I'd see the film finally. I think it came on Channel 5 in the UK possibly when I was about 16 or 17, and I thought it was really good. I didn't think the action quotient was quite as high as it had been in Rambo 2. That's what it feels like watching it even today, funnily enough, but still a satisfying slice of 80s action. And I love the part at the end when like hundreds of Russians come out and it's just Rambo and Troutman says something like, "What are we going to do?" And Rambo's like, "Well, surrounded them's out." This is an interesting film to come sixth because when I did my 1987 rankings, Dream Warriors only came 10th, and yet Dream Warriors is far and away my favourite Nightmare on Elm Street film. So what this shows us, I think, is that the field in 1988 is much weaker than the field we had for 87. But Dream Master is my second favourite Nightmare on Elm Street film. I think this one got the balance more or less right between comedy Freddy and serious Freddy. I possibly would have liked a bit more of the serious Freddy, but they pretty much got it right. And for me, this is the last great Nightmare on Elm Street film. It was mostly just shite after this one, and it does have, among other things, my favourite kill in the whole franchise, the Roach Motel thing. That was some icky shit. As you might expect, this is a film about a blob-type substance which comes to Earth inside a small meteor, and then it gets out and slowly gets bigger and bigger the more people it devours. It's way more awesome than it sounds. I watched it for the first time when I was a teen, and it scared me a little bit actually back then. I can remember watching it from underneath the safety of my duvet, and there were quite a few hair-raising scenes for me back then, especially when the characters had to survive certain moments in darkened cinemas and the sewers. The two leads in this are played by Kevin Dillon and Shawnee Smith. They have an excellent chemistry. There's an interesting subplot with a division of the army who come in, but they have sort of sinister intentions. Honestly, this film deserves to be more of a classic than it is, actually. It's truly excellent. I would have seen Young Guns around about 93, and it wouldn't have been long after that that I persuaded my dad to let me rent number two, and I really enjoyed that one as well. I always used to love these films. I was able to really get behind these outlaws. I found them really heroic and gallant, you know, the way that they run and fight to their last breath, their last bullet. And the cast list for this first film, I mean, it was so deep. You had Emilio Estevez, Keith Sutherland, Charlie Sheen, Terry O'Quinn, Jack Palance, Terence Stamp. The list of names just went on forever. The bit that my dad always hated was when Lou Diamond Phillips' character, there's another one, Lou Diamond Phillips, his character sort of teleports away from the house where the final shootout is taking place. And then he reappears with some horses so the characters can make a convenient getaway. That plot failing used to drive my dad bonkers every time we watched the film, and we watched it like 5 or 6 times during the 90s. God, he hated that bit because there's just no explanation for how Lou Diamond Phillips teleports away and then comes back. The bit I always hated is when Charlie Sheen dies. Every time I watched the movie, I hated the way that he just walks out in front of the hut and just lets himself get shot. And I hated the old guy in that hut so much. I think he just disappears from the film. I don't think he comes back from memory. I'm a big Maniac Cop fan. I have done a full review series for this. You'll find those reviews in my Maniac Cop playlist. I first saw all three of the films around about 93, 94 when I rented them from the local video store. You've probably gathered from watching a lot of my videos that I did spend the vast majority of the 90s just renting movies. Me and my dad were renting like two or three different films a week at one point. It had to be. And I'll never forget my first watch of the original Maniac Cop. I found the character Matt Cordell really scary, but at the same time, I had a shred of sympathy for him as well because of his whole backstory with Sing Sing Prison. There's an amazing flashback halfway through this film where you get to see how Cordell became the Maniac Cop. It's really emotional. It's got some great music set to it. But this is one of those films that just has the power to cement your love for horror, sort of. There's no one film that does that. There's sort of like a whole bunch of films that you might watch in your youth. And I think for me, Maniac Cop was one of them. So our first film to possibly qualify for the grand final is Halloween 4, but I do think it's possibly one of the weaker films to finish in a runners-up position that we've had in this series. And it's worth remembering that not all the films which come second will be able to be in the grand final, because I think I worked out at one point that out of the 50 or 60 films which come second, I will have to trim out about 10 of them just to make sure that I've got exactly 100 films. I could easily imagine that Halloween 4 might be one of those films that gets cut. Another one that could get cut is Magnum Force, which I think came second in one of my 1970s rankings, but we'll see. And I don't want to appear to be being too negative about Halloween 4 as a movie because it still comes second today out of 20 films. This is a special horror film for me. At one point during my teenage years, I might have said that this was my favorite horror film. It certainly isn't now, but I don't think this fourth film in the series gets a lot of love outside of Halloween fandom. I mean, whenever you hear people talk about the Halloween films who are maybe not big Halloween fans, you won't hear a lot of praise for Halloween 4. It's usually just the original and possibly H2O and Halloween 2018, but this is a really good one. I would probably only have it like fifth or sixth in my Halloween rankings these days, but I'll never forget the first time I watched this film when I was about 13. It was a roller coaster ride. I mean, it's only an 85-minute movie, but as somebody who was the age that I was back then, it really scared me. And it's another movie like the original Maniac Cop, which just helped shape me into the horror fan that I am today. So it is a special movie. I am a little bit surprised that it's come second today. It does prove my theory that 1988 is one of the weaker years for me for movies in the 1980s, but we'll see what happens. We've got a long way to go yet before we are through the heats in this series. I don't know what quality the other second place films are going to be yet. So for now, let's get on and find out what is the winning film in today's ranking. And as you will possibly agree with me, this film is head and shoulders above any other film we've been talking about today. Let's find out what it is. Who doesn't love Die Hard, right? I mean, this film is incredible. My introduction to the Die Hard series was actually Die Hard 2, and I thought that was brilliant. I mean, I watched Die Hard 2 probably about 5 or 6 times, and then discovered that there was this whole other great Die Hard movie that came out before it. I mean, the superlatives I could reel off about this movie could go on a long time if I decided to spend the time on it. I mean, it's got a great protagonist in John McClane. The location, the building where this takes place in, it's fantastic. It feels very real. I like all of the characters in the film, like Ellis and McClane's wife, and even what's the Japanese guy's name with the fancy suit? He's a good character for as long as he lasts in the movie. You've got the FBI guys who turn up, played by Robert Darby and his buddy, and then the news crew and Argyle. It's just a whole fantastic group of characters. The action is amazing. At no point does it feel silly or unrealistic. The gore is spot on. I mean, this is a brutal film. Just think of McClane walking around without his shoes on at one point, and he's dragging a trail of blood. The fight scene between McClane and Carl, the blonde terrorist, absolutely love that fight. And you've got a great ending as well with Hans Gruber falling off the building. Die Hard is just a wonderful, wonderful film. And as soon as I started to put this video together and I realized that this was the year that Die Hard came out, I sort of instantly knew that probably this film wasn't going to get beat, at least for this year. I don't know how Die Hard will get on in the grand final. I think it could do extremely well. We will see further down the line when that video gets made. Probably still quite some time for now. We're only in 1988, so 33 more heats to go, I think. But for now, there is one more question today which needs to be asked. I've only got 2 films to name in this section today, and they're both sequels. So the first of those would be Phantasm 2. I watched the original Phantasm just a few months ago. I thought it was a really interesting film. I would absolutely be up for going on and watching Phantasms 2 through 5. I haven't yet got around to the next one, which would be Phantasm 2. I hear that it's a pretty good sequel, so that is definitely on my agenda going forwards. And the other film that I'll mention is Caddyshack 2. Now, this film doesn't have a good reputation, but I love the original film so much that I would like to give the second one watch at some point. Possibly it's going to turn out to be rubbish, but who knows? Maybe I am just weird enough to get some enjoyment out of it. I don't know. Maybe I'll never get around to watching it. I don't know. Anyway, that's it for today. That was my rankings of 1988. Die Hard is definitely going through to the final, and we will see when it comes to Halloween 4. Until next time, cheerio.